Welcome back to Frozen Bytes, the Frozen Ark Podcast. My name is Rhian and I'm your host for today's episode, where we're going to be exploring the issue of insect declines and potential insect conservation strategies. I'm going to be chatting to two members of the Frozen Ark Advisory Board, who are both entomology experts, Max Tercel and Jordan Cuff. You both want to just start off by doing like an introduction of who you are and what you do. That would be great.
Cool. I'm happy to start, if that's okay with you, Jordan.
Yeah, please do.
He's nodding affirmatively and replying affirmatively. I'm Max. I am a PhD student at Cardiff University, and I basically loved insects and other invertebrates and the wider the wider animal life of the world for basically my whole life. Yeah, that's basically me. That's all you really need to know.
That's great, thank you. Jordan?
I'm Jordan Cuff. I'm a Postdoctoral Research Associate at Newcastle University. I recently finished a PhD in Cardiff University. I mostly specialise in trophic interactions and invertebrates.
Lovely, thank you. So moving on to some more insect related things. I'd say let's start with Max here. Could you sort of just talk us through and explain to anyone listening sort of the situation in terms of insect decline, what sort of main threats insects are facing globally, what is happening at the moment?
Yeah, so there's I'm sure a lot of your listeners will have heard, but insects are going through a bit of a rough time at the moment. There's been numerous studies that have looked at their general abundance, but yeah, there's general abundance, like biomass, species diversity, things like that, and a lot of the problems arise from agricultural practices. So lots of pesticides that can they spread into the surrounding environment, which are very, very damaging. You might have heard of neonicotinoids, for example, which are particularly bad for bees and other pollinators. But one of the overarching issues in the world really is actually habitat destruction. That's the leading cause of extinction across, I think, all animal groups really, or most of them anyway. And for insects, it's no exception. That's a big problem. So there's a lot of different issues which are affecting insects negatively, and they really need our help and our love, which Jordan can provide in huge quantities, of course.
Why am I providing the love?
Because I can't. All my love is for you.
I think insects are going through a rough patch. Has to be one of my favourite understatements of the insect decline problem.
Yeah,
it sums it up fairly well, I'd say.
Yeah, it is pretty rough.
Yeah, quite a long-term rough patch, but a
series of connected awful patches.
So, Jordan, so obviously if insects are going through this very rough patch, it's very awful. But so what does that mean? What are some of the main roles of insects in our global ecosystem? What does it mean if their decline continues and they don't fulfill those roles anymore?
I would say the main role of invertebrates in ecosystems is every role of an ecosystem. I think there are sort of two ways to think about it, I suppose. So one is from the sort of environmental and ecological perspective, in which case invertebrates span basically every functional niche that exists. They do things like breaking down material. They'll graze things. They'll pollinate. They'll eat things. But in terms of an anthropocentric perspective, which is, I think, the one that most people seem to care about, sadly, they do everything from, well, I've already mentioned a couple of them, like pollinating, which is important for growing our fruits and vegetables. But they also protect our fruits and vegetables from other things like pests by eating them. They also do all sorts, a whole myriad of services. They're basically the people who, well, the animals that turn the world around and keep everything going. I can see Max reacting to my misuse of the word people there. I think fundamentally the world collapses without invertebrates because they fulfill every possible function that we could ever want them to.
Yeah, they're fairly fundamental then. So what would you say is probably some of the things that we should be doing, like on a large scale, like in terms of big companies, governments and things like that? What sort of like action should we be taking to stop the destruction that's being caused? Anyone can jump in on
that. Okay, so there's many things that we can do, but perhaps the most important is, and the first step, I think, really is actually caring. It might be a bit abstract, but so many people don't care about insects or invertebrates generally because they're small. A lot of people find them a bit sort of creepy, or some of them might be actively sort of quite scared of them. And some of these are quite natural responses, the way our brains work and things. Certain shapes like spiders, obviously there's a reason that our brain sort of interprets these shapes as potentially dangerous. In most cases, that's obviously not true. So sort of getting over that hurdle mentally is a really important first step, I think, for everyone. Even if an animal is dangerous, of course, that doesn't mean it's going to hurt you as well. So I think caring is a really important first step. I mean, a lot of other things that we can do in sort of more practical ways, like at the government level. Obviously, we need far stronger sort of land protection policies, and that's, I think, the fundamentals of conservation generally. So if you want to conserve anything, you really need to put some space aside for wildlife. But there are agricultural practices we can do, which I believe Jordan is probably better suited to answering, given his agricultural nature.
I myself am not a farmer, as much as I'd love to have a farm. But I suppose I have worked with my research on several farms. So there are many practices that, for example, the Welsh government and the UK government and many international governments have implemented already. So a lot of them are sort of incentivizing setting aside land, like Max said, for biodiversity, so like beetle banks and sort of different types of field margins. So one of the big problems in farming, at least in this country, is that we're migrating ever faster toward having these large sort of agrarian prairies of sort of hedgeless crop. And what you have there is a monoculture that is providing habitat for a very small niche of species, which aren't necessarily beneficial to the farm anyway. So one thing that I'm currently working on is looking at the benefit of different margins in farmlands and how they might benefit biodiversity differently and create these sort of habitat corridors through which different species can disperse and exist. But I think it's really important as well to not just think about it from sort of a governmental or industrial or agricultural perspective, but also individual. Because the actions of one person may be a drop in the ocean, but an ocean is made up of many, many drops. And I think actually through individual actions we can make just as great an impact. And I think there are many different initiatives such as plastic free and sort of using public transport more and driving less, and all these different ideas, even dietary choices, they can each add up to this monumental impact. And I think it's important just to stay motivated in doing these things, because they help the environment and by association the invertebrates.
Are there any things in particular to invertebrates that you recommend for people day to day? Obviously, there are things you can do for the sort of whole ecosystem, using public transport and stuff. What about, I don't know, more specific to invertebrates? Are there things as well people can do? Or
Max, you were talking about this quite recently, weren't you?
Yeah, you can. There are things you can do day to day. So I think one of the things that Jordan actually touched on is actually kind of it is a thing you can do day to day, but it affects more than just in your back garden, for example. But like dietary choices is definitely one. So of course, eating more sustainable sources of food, having a primarily plant-based diet, etc., can obviously cut down on the land you're using in total. Things like that. Of course, if you have a garden, like it might, as Jordan says, again, seem like a drop in the ocean. But if everyone with a garden has a beetle bank, or like mining bee, like solitary mining bee, nest spaces, things like that, certain like native flowers that provide a lot of nectar, then that can really help certain groups. And actually research just out of Bristol has shown that gardens are the largest source of nectar in cities. So obviously that provides a lot of floral resources for bees and other pollinators that we love. So yeah, there are definitely things you can do on a sort of day-to-day basis, as well as sort of like trying to enact political change, which is a bit, more needed.
I think what Max said earlier about caring as well is a big thing, and just having an interest in invertebrates and basically what they do for the world is really important in sort of propagating that caring guardianship of them.
Yeah, definitely. And if you sort of focus more on what you've got in your back garden and things, it'll really encourage people to actually care a bit more as well, which would be really nice.
Yeah, I think on the sort of gardening front as well, it's so important to ensure that we're not just putting wildflowers down on every possible available space, and we start to think about diversifying the habitats that are available to these invertebrates. So Max mentioned sort of mining bees. We want to have some nice bare earth. We want to have some grasses. We want some flowers. When I say we, we're talking about the invertebrates here, the royalist we. But I think it's really important to instigate that diversity of things. And I think things like honeybees are becoming ever more popular. And actually, what we're finding increasingly is that the more honeybees we introduce into an area, the more the wild bees struggle, because actually they're competing for a limited resource. So I think it's also about being conscious about what you're doing and trying to do to help, and whether that's actually doing what you expect it to do.
Yeah, definitely. There can be some things which sort of look like you're doing the right thing until you think about the full consequences of it.
Yeah.
So that's definitely important to think about. So you touched a bit on some of the projects you've worked on, but if you could both sort of go through, like, in a bit more detail, just anything you're doing at the moment, or some things you've done previously which are sort of relevant, or anything that you just think is quite exciting.
So I spent a lot of my PhD looking at spiders in farmland and how they protect farms, particularly sort of cereal crops, from pests. So obviously we want to use fewer pesticides. That's a big thing. So relying on more natural means of pest control is a really important measure in getting to that. But more recently, my work in Newcastle focuses on looking at the benefits conferred by different field margins and how they might factor into the sort of cost-benefit trade-off. So having these margins on fields might increase the biodiversity, but they might also detriment the crop in some cases. So we really need to think about which margins benefit the most and how they sort of the trade-offs between the beneficials and sort of antagonists that live in them really come together. That's kind of a gist of that. But I think Max might be able to fill you in on some of the really exciting stuff that he's doing.
So in terms of my research and stuff, I began working on insect flight and basically characterizing how different groups of insects fly and things by using high-speed cameras and loads of cool equipment for my master's, that was. And then took a completely different direction and went with, which was always my passion, the ecology of insects for my PhD. And so my PhD question is basically looking at the diet of the big-headed ants on Round Island, which is just north of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. And Round Island is essentially this island that houses many species found nowhere else on Earth, but it's been invaded by these big-headed ants, and we don't really know how they're affecting the ecosystem. So it's kind of my job to look at what's going on there. So it's quite nice because we have this central sort of quite cutting-edge lab-based project, but around that there's a lot of other cool stuff to do as well. So that's basically my PhD. I'm also looking at the diet of some centipedes, the giant centipedes on Round Island, which are truly terrifying to be woken up by in the middle of the night. Even though I did just say, let's not be scared of invertebrates. Sometimes you should give them some respect. And that's sort of like a comparison with a native species compared to the introduced ant species to see if there's like sort of competition or if there's some other interesting patterns going on. And I've been roped into a whole number of projects with Jordan. So we work reasonably closely together. Well, he's actually left me now. He's gone to Newcastle for greener pastures, but sad times. I'll end it there on a depressing note.
Well, at least you got to work together for some time. So on a slightly happier note, as you're obviously sort of insect lovers and have focused a lot of your education and career on it, is there anything that you think explains why you've got this passion? Like, what can you share with our listeners that's given you this enthusiasm, or is it just always been?
I think you should ask Jordan.
It's a great question. I think, to be honest, I didn't really realize that you could have a job in entomology ever. So I've gone toward various different career paths throughout my childhood. But since kind of committing to this, I've gone back and I found out that I actually had quite a large interest in invertebrates growing up. I actually wrote a small field guide to wasps when I was about 6 or 7, which I shared with the Field Studies Council, and they said that they would publish it, but I'm still waiting. And to be honest, I drew loads of spiders and things like that on everything. So clearly there was an interest there, but I think ultimately they've always appealed to me because they're kind of the weird ones. They're down in the dirt and places like that, and they look weird, and they're basically like small little aliens. They're so different to us that I just find that fascinating. And the sheer diversity and sort of core understanding that we have of them just means that it's a constant mystery tour of adventure. We're constantly finding new things about them in completely different contexts, and I don't think that the mystery tour is anywhere near over. So I think as well, you just have some absolutely stunning and amazing behaviours and adaptations that never cease to amaze me.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Obviously, a lot of kids are so interested in like the sort of the unknown and like aliens and stuff like that, but sometimes we'll sort of shy away from invertebrates and stuff. So it'd be nice if we could combine the two and spark that curiosity a bit earlier.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What about you, Max?
Yeah, so I have basically always been interested in insects. I'm not entirely sure why. It's just like a thing that I've always loved, much like Jordan, and I've always loved you, Jordan. And yeah, no, it's a strange thing. I agree with everything that Jordan said. They're like these little aliens that are basically everywhere. Like no matter where you're looking, you're basically looking at insects, unless you're literally in the middle of Antarctica or something. So yeah, no, they're amazing. They're so important, of course. They're the little things that run the world, as E.O. Wilson said. And they really do. They're so ecologically important. The diversity is astonishing. Like we're just scratching the surface of their diversity, really. There are just so many things out there that have not been discovered, never been, or they might have been named, but have never had their life history looked at. So I think on some level it's about like discovery as well. Like we know so much about like lions, for example, but we know nothing about like parasitoid wasps in comparison, which are, I think, in many ways far more interesting. Like they lay an egg in some prey that they find. I mean, we don't even necessarily know how they find the prey, and then it then grows in this host and produces a fully formed wasp, and it preserves its host's life for as long as possible by basically not consuming the vital organs and things like that. It's just so incredible how they've evolved. And then my main passion are the ants, which have the most complex societies outside of humans that we know of in the universe. And yeah, just everything about ants gets me excited pretty much. I don't know what more to say without speaking your ears off, really. Yeah, insects are really cool.
I think that's a fairly inspirational statement.
I inspire every time I think about insects. Sharply inspire.
Excellent. It's what we need. Well, I think that's probably all of the questions I really wanted to ask. Thank you to Max and Jordan for joining this episode of the Frozen Ark podcast. It was really enjoyable to learn more about the importance of the insect world and what needs to be done to help protect it. In our previous episodes, we've discussed the Virtual Ark project, climate change, and coral preservation. If you've missed any of these episodes, you can find them on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe so you can listen to all of our future episodes. Please don't hesitate to get in touch via social media if you have any questions or comments. Thank you for listening.
My name's Jordan Cuff. I have a 25-metre swimming badge that I got when I was about 10, but I haven't been swimming much recently.
I don't know why Jordan's laughing so hysterically.
Oh, Max, you just unmuted.
I did unmute, but I fully relent to your superiority.
Wow. I relent to your superiority.
My goodness.
Why not just dub it all with insect noises? Well, you
There's
could choose
no
a different
content.
insect. I could be a cricket, so every time I open my mouth, it's just. And then I don't know. Max can be a bee, and then you can choose whatever you want for yourself. Does this mean that we've solved the insect decline problem?